Yourselves, please, guys. Starting with you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. So, hello, everyone. My name is Dan Wood. I'm COO and Esports lead at UKIE. For those who don't know what UKIE is, we're the trade body and network for the interactive entertainment sector in the UK. So we've got about 470 members at last counting. Within that, we've got a really good who's who of the esports sector. So very quick run-throughs. We've got big IP holders like Riot, Activision Blizzard, Hi-Rez, and so on. We've got big tournament holders, platforms, and event companies like ESL, FACEIT, of course, and Belong. We've got grassroots organisations like Newell, NSE, teams like Endpoint, so basically anyone who's sort of in the whole ecosystem. So what we do what most trade bodies and networks do, so we represent those businesses to anyone who wants to listen, but mainly it's government and media. So just a couple of examples of what we did. We did the first ever esports white paper in the UK, which is the first time, and I think probably still the only time, the esports sector's come together to shape positions on some of the big issues facing us. That was a couple of years ago, but it's still kind of the foundation that we kind of evolved from till now. And we also, the thing I'm most excited about we do in esports is we run a really good skills and grassroots program called Digital Schoolhouse Esports Tournament, which I hope you get a chance to talk about today at some point.
Yep.
I'm Clement Murphy. I'm the marketing manager at FACEIT. We are the world's largest competitive gaming platform and esports tournament operator. We manage esports from the very grassroots kind of open level right through to the very top level, including some international Counter-Strike events and others.
I'm Heather. I'm from ESL. You've probably heard a lot about ESL, but just to reiterate, we're a global tournament organiser with a very open ecosystem, a bit like FACEIT's. But you know, we do everything once again from grassroots up to those premium tournaments such as IEMs and ESL ones, and we focus on a lot of digital content and brand activations such as DHL, which you would have heard Charlie talk about today.
I'm Ben Greenstone. I'm the director of Taso Advisory. We help businesses to understand the political, policy and regulatory challenges they face, and then to devise and deliver plans to deliver credible kind of responses to that.
Thank you, guys. I just realised when I walked on stage, I didn't explain where I'm from. I work for the British Esports Association, so we're a not-for-profit set up to promote and support esports in Britain. We run tournaments in schools and colleges across the UK, and I also run Esports News UK, which is a consumer-focused news website. So looking at last year, I'm aware we're in the second half of 2019 now, but looking back on 2018, as someone who's followed UK esports very closely over the past 4 or 5 years, last year was a massive year. We had 2 majors here for the first time, the FACEIT London CSGO major and ESL Birmingham, ESL 1 Birmingham, a huge Dota 2 major, which returned this year as well as another big event in Birmingham. We've also seen, beyond those events as well, we've also seen a lot of talent come from the UK, a lot of pro players emerge, like Tex in FIFA, loads of like UK players emerging now, and also esports organisations like XL Esports, who are based here at Twickenham. I can see Kieran in the audience there, who secured a slot in the League of Legends LEC, which is the top level of European League of Legends. So we're making leeway in esports now, and I'd like to ask the panel, how did sort of last year happen? Why now? You know, and do you think this is the tipping point for esports in the UK?
Yeah. So well, I think the UK's long been seen as a kind of sleeping giant of esports in terms of it's got so many of the ingredients that's needed. It's obviously got a passionate games playing community. It's got a tradition of playing sports and all the infrastructure required. It's got the brands and advertisers. It's got a big investment community. And it's all been there, and I think last year just saw it kind of suddenly activated, and obviously that kind of snowballs. I think every event that happens acts as another shop window on esports, and certainly from where we are, we get a lot of calls from property developers to local authorities saying, "Oh, hi, how can I get esports into my new development?" and so on. So you're certainly seeing, from our point of view, evidence of that. We've also seen evidence from our Digital Schoolhouse programme. Demand for that's never been higher. The only thing that's really holding that back is actually supply of kit. So, in terms of the appetite for grassroots esport and so on, we've never seen it. Yeah, more demand from where we are, certainly.
Yeah. Would you guys agree with that?
I mean, there's kind of a myth that the UK particularly has been behind in the industry in terms of player development, and I think sometimes we score the success of an industry on the wrong metrics. Many years ago, there was some amazing pro UK players. They were probably some of the best in titles that now aren't competitive, and the UK was certainly leading the way. Some things kind of die down and then they grow back up. But I think overall, over the years, we've built a hub, and I'm sure we'll discuss that further in the panel, of reasons why the UK industry has been growing and why now people are looking in rather than us looking out. I think at the end of 2017, ESL, I had the luxury of kind of getting to know James quite well at the end of December, and they were already identifying that 2018 was going to be the pivotal year for events and starting to really drawing the mainstream attention to esports. We didn't know whether that was going to be an ESL 1 Birmingham at the time, because even at the end of 2017 that wasn't an agreed thing, ESL 1 Birmingham. That came along in February and we did it in May. So turnaround is very quick in the UK, we want something to happen. But we certainly had identified that it would be something that would be the tipping point for the UK, and we'd already been setting up campaigns with Intel to celebrate with the hashtag Year of UK Esports. There was something in the air that just felt right.
Yeah, I think from a tournament operator perspective, we'd been doing lots of smaller events, and in the years leading up to 2018, we've been showing that there is an appetite to not only watch esports live and to get involved from a fan's perspective, but also to really like increase the share of grassroots esports that happens here as well. So there is a huge fan base here. There is a huge number of people interested in playing and watching esports. The only problem we don't have right this second is the top level players in the most competitive games at the moment. But leading up to 2018, we had proved that there was this audience, that there was this appetite for esports in the UK, and the people that award these events, in our case Valve, had come along and said, right, now the time is right for us to give a big event to the UK. The fans are here, they're really noisy, they really love this stuff, and you can see that success has been followed on by CWL London and things like that. Yeah,
and we know that success, and it's obviously a scary move when, I'm sure, Clem, when you would find out, you have the FACEIT major, like, oh my God, I hope we sell tickets, even though you know that you're going to sell tickets. And the same for, I was told at like 2 a.m. in Poland, by the way, ESL 1 Birmingham is a major, and you're like, okay, no pressure at all. You have a moment of doubt, but the figures and the facts are there. The UK audience are the second largest in Europe to travel out of the UK and go to European esports events. So the culture here of going to live events is already there. They just needed more, and now they're there. They're at 100% behind it, and I think that's why 2019 and onwards is going to be super exciting for us, particularly to be working in the industry. Yeah,
I mean, you saw plenty of really great shots from all sorts of UK events, from the Birmingham Major, from Counter-Strike Major, of UK fans really showing up and being and making the broadcasts and making the events seem colourful, full of noise, full of passion, people with, obviously drinking way too much and having a great time. And that sort of atmosphere is something that we do well across sports as well, and something that really has translated well. And from a publisher or an organiser's perspective, you look at a UK audience and you think, right, how do I get that kind of passion and level of kind of dedication towards the events for my game or for my team?
Absolutely, and you've touched on something there, Clem, which I think is interesting. What are the UK's strengths in esports? Because for me, the UK produces some fantastic hosts in esports, and I think I'd like to say that we've got a good sense of humour here. We're known for our banter and so on between esports organisations, and I see that as a strength. And Clem touched on it. We have a great fan base here. We've had events like the majors, like the Call of Duty World League Birmingham. Really passionate fans. What's a great selling point that the UK has for esports organisers like yourselves to have events here? Why should they come here? Because for me, we do have some good, unique selling points.
Yeah, I mean, without kind of repeating ourselves too much, the fans are a fantastic element of that. But I think that we're also, kind of across the board, very good organisers. We do very good kind of structured planning. We have plenty of organisations and industry bodies such as Esports Insider or other people who really want to kind of grab hold of this thing and help support it in lots of different ways. We've got obviously UKIE and Taso doing that stuff as well. So beyond just the tournament organisation, there is a lot of support network things that we are building, and we are really investing heavily in providing a good place for esports to thrive.
And I think it's being recognised on quite a national level. I mean, maybe you could touch upon like how you would probably help us, or how you've helped us and stuff with, in general. Yeah. When I say us, I mean esports in the UK.
Yeah, so I mean, I think some of the things, as Dan said earlier, that make the UK a really attractive place if you're a tournament organiser, right, is we are really good at running events. We always have been. We're less good at producing great players, but that's true across lots of UK sports, right? We're pretty rubbish at football as it goes. But I think in terms of like other things that have made the UK increasingly attractive, as Heather mentions, there's been increased government interest in it, and that is actually quite attractive if you are a tournament organiser wanting to know that you will have the support of national and local government to run your event. London and partners have done some amazing work actually, giving esports organisers, tournament organisers, the support they need to come and bring their events to London. And I think as we see more and more of that, and the government has just given £4 million to the Weaver Consortium to develop some incredible stuff to do with esports viewing. The more of that we see, I think the more the UK is going to be seen as an attractive place to come.
I'm glad you mentioned that as well, Ben, because you were obviously at DCMS up until recently, and the outgoing culture minister, Margot James, has done a lot, got to know esports in the UK, and through her support behind events like ESL One Birmingham. What was that like working there, and do you think that's the first step the government has taken, and we can expect maybe more?
I think there's certainly that was the first step that the UK government has taken into esports. It is not the kind of thing that civil servants and government ministers tend to know loads about or spend lots of their time doing. I still don't think Margot spends her weekends playing Counter-Strike. But I think that there is something incumbent on kind of all of us in this industry, whether or not you're kind of a developer or a tournament organiser or the trade body, right, to get involved and go and talk to government, as UKIE already does, and say, look, like we're here, we're a sector that matters, give us the support we need. Margot's obviously gone now, so we need to start that process again.
And I was going to say, just starting that process again, like, although deal with mainstream media, and we have to try and say, like, although this is quite a nascent industry, it's actually been around for 2 decades and ongoing, but we're still on that education piece every time, and that's why there's been maybe a slower delay, because the infrastructure of buildings and venues haven't maybe been up for that conversation, and now are coming to and opening their eyes a little bit more. It could be the fact of trying to get an internet line, a gig line into a building has been almost impossible, but now telecom people who sponsor esports events are now realising, we can maybe help in other ways than just putting our logo on something. But just because we had an amazing 2018 doesn't mean that that's easy and now it's just instant success. We have challenges that we're constantly going to overcome, and things like moving in and out ministers and government figures where we've worked a year or so. We have to start those conversations again, but I think that's the fun of it as well. Yeah,
and it's a constantly shifting landscape, isn't it? The video games industry and esports, sort of part of that is always shifting. We've seen the DCMS committee. We've got I think underlying it all, we've got a really supportive government still, and notwithstanding Margot leaving, which is a shame, but government's still supportive. But we've had a DCMS select committee that's not quite pulled the rug out from under video games, but made some quite swinging statements. It shows there's a lot of work to be done, both from to avoid bad regulation, but also reputational damage. I think some of the headlines about games being addictive and not good, so you're just seeing headlines all the time. Does that have an impact on esports take up at a young age? If a kid's having a conversation with their parent saying, I want to be a pro esports player, does that make that conversation more difficult? I hope not, but we need to make sure we're pushing back against that, the reputational threats all the time. And I think actually from a wider games perspective, I think esports is kind of that embodiment of positive video games. We need to make the most of that. it's public facing, it's big events, it's actually putting human faces to it. I think for the last 40 years, video games, the games themselves have been the stars we've tried to promote. Now you've got casters, analysts, you've got teams, you've got big brands, players and teams. So making them the shop window to the industry has never been more important, because as I say, I think esports is a really good counter to a lot of the reputational threats we're getting at the moment.
I think that's an interesting point, because we've got this really weird kind of differential between the level of success of British teams and players and the level that we want to be at in terms of organisational or supporting the industry. Those kind of stories of games addiction and this kind of negative aspects of gaming and esports are only very slightly counteracted by some stories we have now, like the young Fortnite player who became a millionaire overnight. So Essex boy wins £1 million playing Fortnite is a positive headline of the great achievements that you can make as an esports player. We don't have enough of those to counteract the negative.
Interesting, that same story also generated half the amount again of people going, he spent 10 hours a day playing Fortnite to get to that level, which is again, that was actually mentioned in the DCMS report, and it just shows the kind of bias you're facing a little bit, because I'm sure Rafa Nadal or whoever else spent 10 hours trying to get to be the best player they can, but it's seen as a bad thing for esports. And that particular Fortnite story was interesting from us, because we saw both, it was a positive showcase on the industry, but also quite a few people saying, well, this is clearly not right, you're spending that amount of time.
And so I think what you need then in the longer term is, all of us in this room are probably aware of the fact that much more goes into it than sitting in front of a computer and kind of bashing some buttons for 10 hours a day. Well, but there's a big job, I think, to go out and educate, like, not just government and the select committee, but the public more broadly, right? And I think this is something that industry could do better together, to go out and talk about the positives and the plus sides. Yeah. I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, I think there's you see countries like Denmark who have really embraced esports as a thing, and from all different levels. And I think that the fact that the best Counter-Strike team in the world of last year, at least, was Danish. Those two things go really well hand in hand, so that it really enables the government to go forward with positive gaming and esports initiatives if there is that level of high performance at the same time. So you can have superstars that have been made and supported by this system. Which comes first?
And I believe it was Denmark who's either president or prime minister opened an esports event, and that was massive. That was really recognised
Poland as well. We had it at IM Katowice as well. So
that's it.
And also the mayor of Stockholm announced TI Stockholm on a video as a VT. So we need to get someone, I don't know who's currently in Parliament, who is it? Not
well, they can't go so quickly.
Not him, but someone else to announce something for esports, I guess.
Yeah, I just want to say, guys, I'll try and save 5 to 10 minutes at the end for questions. If you want to ask a question, please use the app. There's details up there. I think it's slido.com. We've seen some questions coming in. I'm not ignoring them. I'll try and cover those off for the last sort of 5-10 minutes. So that's really good. You guys have mentioned there some of the obstacles we face, I guess, in terms of mainstream acceptance of esports in the UK, how we can make it seen as more of a positive activity. Some of the news stories we still see come from mainstream journalists who clearly don't understand or can't see the positives of esports. That's one of the obstacles. What else do you think might be standing in the way from us having more years like 2018 and this year? Or come on to some of the positives we've seen this year. What needs to be improved?
Yeah, so I think looking at our experience at UKIE and looking at where esports is, I think there's a whole level of work to kind of determine. We talked a lot about what government can do. We haven't actually got to any specifics about what they can do, but I think there's something there around funding, of course, and skills and so on. But there's also a big bit of work that I think the esports industry is at the stage of doing, where you've got to define what the industry can do for itself. Shaping a sort of overall strategy that's everyone common aims, delivered collectively, that sit alongside of the amazing stuff done by commercial organisations. So to give you examples, when we've looked at the game development community here over the last 10 years, it was nearly dead 10 years ago, and there was a collective decision by that community to kind of do something about it. So we looked at the funding landscape, we looked at the skills landscape, and they were the main two component parts of the time. We said, what are we going to do about it? And if we do this, what's government going to do about it? So there's a whole load of stuff. What's the industry's collective goals around diversity? Obviously, there's lots of great initiatives going on, but how can we, what is that can happen that can supercharge what happens around diversity? What do we do about getting get esport businesses of whatever size, but from startups upward, how do we help them grow? For developers, we've got a long-standing trade investment program which helps them get investor ready, so it sort of takes them through the business planning stage, questions, helps them answer questions of why do you need to grow, who do you speak to, how do you shape a good pitch, and then once that's all done, we put them in front of investors. So there's all this kind of stuff, this kind of support stuff that the industry's kind of said it needs for itself, and then obviously organisations like UKIE and others, British Esports Association, can pull together to try and achieve. And I think thinking about some of those sort of bigger strategic goals and this collective activity that can now be done, because there is I think in the UK particularly from my experience, it's a really strong community and strong network. All the businesses here seem obviously competing over certain things, but there's a willingness to want to try and grow it as a whole. How do we come up with that strategy to grow it as a whole, I think, around some key areas?
Yeah, definitely. And what you were saying about development, Dan, is interesting, because Britain has some great game developers here, and I think the tax breaks were introduced for game developers.
Yeah, so it's a really good example about how obviously the businesses themselves, the ones doing the hard graft, building their business, putting out that great content, in the same way that esports business here, putting on major tournaments and everything. But it came through we agreed that we needed some kind of boost to that, and tax breaks formed a big part of it. So
I interviewed Sport England recently, and I asked them about funding and esports, because they don't recognise esports as a sport, but that doesn't mean they don't recognise it as a beneficial activity and a popular activity. And I asked them the question, do you think we'll see funding come from the government, from Sport England, into esports teams and grassroots teams in the future? And they said it's a possibility. Yeah. Is that something you think could happen? Would you like to see?
I think it's... Sorry, Heather.
No, I was just going to say about the esports versus sports sitch.
So I mean, I think the first thing I'd say actually is that what is often not thought about a great deal is what comes with being a sport. There are huge responsibilities in terms of governance, reporting. We saw the DCMS Select Committee request that DCMS, the department, starts thinking about how esports can introduce a duty of care in the same way as traditional sports do. So I think there's sometimes a desire for kind of affirmation of being described as a sport without a lot of thought about what that actually means. And, does it need to be a sport? Does it help anything? I think probably the answer is no, actually.
Yeah.
I think aside from the consideration of being given a sport, there absolutely does need to be some separate thinking done about how do we make the UK an attractive destination for international esports events. Yeah. You see there are, for instance, League of Legends stuff. They had host cities pitching to them, saying, please bring us the league championships. Please bring this to our city. We recognise the not only economic but cultural benefit this can bring to our city. And we, at the moment, at least not to my knowledge, we don't have too many of those kind of conversations happening. We may be on a very, very local level where you can have, universities involved in bringing stuff to them, but that's on a very small level. We need to help conversations happen to attract more international big tier 1 events to the UK. And that needs to happen on several different levels, structural as well. So things, really basic stuff like for an organiser such as FACEIT or ESL to be able to have a recognised type of visa that can be applied to esports players, and specific funding or bursaries or reimbursements or access to really good preferential rates for certain venues that understand the needs of an esports community.
Yeah, the whole sports versus esports thing. I mean, if it helps get visas quicker, that's great, because that's what we need desperately, because we're having, even on local grassroots tournaments, people who are competing in our national championships who are unable, and teams have to withdraw because they're unable to get a few of visas, and that's really upsetting and disheartening and disenfranchising really in terms of anyone's career as an aspiring pro player. I think it's actually one of the questions, but we'll probably go into, but also like business models, and it's very hard to predict. And businesses are growing year on year in esports, but it's very hard to predict where that revenue might be generated from. We don't just do our own tournaments, we might do white label stuff for other games and broadcasts, and we have to specialise in certain areas to what that company needs at the time to be able to help bring in revenue. And so that's very hard to sometimes forecast and develop on bigger ideas and those conversations you might be having externally, because the narrative of the company and the needs shift very quickly. And that's great in esports because every day is new and exciting, but in the long term it's very hard to plan and forecast, I think.
Yeah, I think you see these enormous numbers being spread around about the size of the industry, billions of pounds, but that is really just concentrated at the very, very top. There is probably, hundreds of organisations before that level, below that level, that really need that kind of level of support, either from a funding perspective or from an organisational support perspective, to not just to kind of feed the very top level, to provide the pathway for players, but also to be able to kind of have players who aren't the very, very top level potentially a reasonable career, because outside of those guys that are earning the very, very top level kind of cash, it drops off really, really quickly.
Yeah. Do you think, so Ben mentioned this DCMS Select Committee. For those of you who aren't aware, the government department concluded its research into immersive and addictive technologies, they called it. They looked at loot boxes in video games. They looked at...
Not the government department.
Yeah.
The Parliamentary Select Committee
that
holds the government department to account.
There we go. And they found that...
That's why you're the expert.
They basically recommended to government that they ban the sale of loot boxes to children in the UK and all these other things. And it raises, they touched on regulation and things like that. Do you as the panel think we need regulation? There's been talks of some kind of professional players association.
One of the things that when we did our white paper, the number one recommendation that came from industry to government was, please don't do anything, which is easier said than done. So by that it means it's a really nascent sector. It's like all the opportunities to grow. Don't introduce any unnecessary regulation. I think that still largely stands. I think what the recommendation that they've come out specifically around esports out of this paper, and as Ben's right, it's not a government paper. There's no guarantee it's ever going to make it policy.
It's recommendation.
Yeah, so basically what they said to esports, the questions were, as I said earlier, how long do players have to play before they get good at esports? Well, that seems like a long time. They must be addicted. So what are you doing to look after them, make sure they don't spend every day they're awake playing video games? Which is kind of that's what the whole kind of inquiry is about, to be honest. And then so they said, well, what? And then they asked, well, have you got any policies and procedures and ways of actually, looking after your players and teams and your games playing communities when they come to your events, whether it's online or live spaces? And the answer to that is yes. Yeah, most esports businesses do, of course, recognise the importance of the mental and physical well-being of their teams and players. They certainly want to make their events nice, welcoming places to come, but and they often have their policies written down, but there isn't a unified thing that everyone signs up to. Now, that's quite an easy thing to try and potentially do, a sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of public statement. So I think in terms of their recommendation there, it's something we could look at, but I think we can also just make the case more that it does already happen. But so in terms of esports in that report, it's not too swinging. I think there's other potential sort of impact from the banning on loot boxes, more regulation of age ratings in the online space. That could also have an impact on how you host events. If they're getting more strict on who could view games, let alone play them, could be interesting. Again, it's some way down the line for that, but so it is what it is. I don't think it was a huge threat, but certainly worth keeping a look on from an esports point of view.
I think we have to draw upon why esports is so successful when things like that come out, when we counteract these kind of press stories, and you have to remember that actually, despite it being, what could be imagined as a siloed activity, in fact, it really is bringing international people. Esports sees no boundaries, it sees no race, it sees no gender, and that's something truly powerful that ignites and and unite people together. And there's a reason why we sell stadiums out in London and in Birmingham, because people want to enjoy that and want to be part of that, and their shared love is games. And so we just have a duty of care, I think, to ensure that no harm is done, but in the same way also have fun and enjoy what we love, which is esports. So it's a very difficult time, but that's why we have to talk to government. We have to work together as an industry and see no boundaries or borders of companies and what we're all trying to get a share of, to be able to still have our jobs and have an industry and grow it and be a model country for the industry.
Yeah, and to be fair to the committee, they did very much say they recognise esports as a real area of potential growth and all that.
It was positive
so
last week,
it was
wasn't
positive,
it?
but yeah.
Amongst all the loot box stuff.
The only other thing I'd add is that if you're a hammer, like every problem's a nail, and as was mentioned on the media and data rights panel just before this one, with esports, there is an underlying IP owner in a way there isn't for sports. So it's there is some requirement to set up governing bodies that can help to govern the leagues and the tournaments that come out. Where with esports, actually, really in my mind, the duty is incumbent on the developer and publisher to make sure that their games are safe and the tournaments that they allow to happen using their IP are safe. So it's not government regulation, right? It's about industry having, as Dan says, its own ideas about what's all right and what's not.
Almost self-regulation in a way,
Yeah,
like the publishers are doing now with their own tournaments. Before we get on to questions, because I'm conscious of time, I just want to ask the panel their views going into the next year and beyond. We've had some exciting things happen this year. Clem mentioned the Fortnite player, the 15-year-old Wolfies, as he's known, picking up just over $1 million. We've had some big successes, the big tournaments like ESL One Birmingham, more UK tournaments, the UKLC, E-Premier League, things like that, more gaming cafes open here. And we also had the news the other day that the parent company of Rogue, the esports team organisation, Rect Global, have picked up the London slot for the Call of Duty League, which starts up next year. So we've got the likes of Excel Esports, we've got Fnatic here, we've got London Spitfire, although it's a Korean team. They're going to have some home matches here. And now we've got London playing host to Call of Duty events in the future as well. What would the panel like to see, if you could keep it to a sentence or two, so we can jump into the questions? What would you like to see happen the rest of this year and maybe next year for esports in the UK? And, what would you like to see?
Yeah, so obviously more of the same. I think that's an amazing list, isn't it? And it just keeps on, and more good news stories coming out from a sort of boring trade body perspective. We are going to be trying to sort of shape this kind of overall strategy, get some impetus behind that. These kind of what are the interventions that can happen that will help benefit the wider ecosystem. Yep. I think that's through getting more investment into esports, through looking at some of the ways we do it. From a personal level, I'd love to see our Digital Schoolhouse esports tournament. We're going from 3,000 kids to 6,000 at least this year, so more grassroots participation. And I'd love to see in the next couple of years people who had their first experience of esports in one of these our Digital Schoolhouse program, start working in the industry and maybe becoming a new next pro player. So yeah.
That was a long sentence or two.
Sorry.
That's all right.
That was a few comments and semicolons.
Three for one.
Clem?
What would a British panel on British esports be without mentioning Brexit? I just hope that it doesn't have too much of a disruptive effect. We've already seen in kind of some conversations that publishers and others are reluctant to award events to British companies or to be hosted in British cities. We do have the Overwatch League and Call of Duty both having home stands in the UK next year, which is very exciting. So we're looking to see real success at those. We're hoping to see those being packed out full of big, leery, drunk British fans, as we all love to see. And for that sort of thing to be the focus rather than anything super disruptive or negative.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing what types of people look to want to start working in the industry and bring all sorts of different heritage and background and experience that might be able to help in other sectors. I think that's going to be quite an exciting turn of events.
I would like to see much more of the industry working together as a whole to educate people who are outside of it and who quite probably have a negative view of it. We've got brilliant organisations, ESL, FACEIT, the Call of Duty franchise, XL. I'd like to see those kind of groups come together and really talk about the sector positively outside of the sector.
Brilliant answers, guys. We've got last 5 minutes. Now, there's a list of questions that have come through here, and it's ordered it for me via top questions. So I'll try and get through as many as I can, but we'll start from the top. This is from an anonymous question. Regarding esports viewership in the UK, how do you think esports could attract a larger female audience? And we get asked this question a lot, particularly from like mainstream publications, so maybe people who aren't aware of esports. Why aren't there more women involved in esports? What are you doing about it? And we want more. We want a more diverse esports. You know, how would you answer that one?
Yeah, hi, it's the female on the panel. Got asked a similar question in a different panel the other day. Look, there is females out there. And I think there's a common misconception that there isn't females, and it's still this myth, this wonderful creature that lurks in the woods. Maybe we are not being spoken to, maybe we're far more quieter, there's still hurdles to overcome in terms of generally feeling maybe safe in a game. That's on the publisher to enhance that community and you know, do things to maybe change chat. You know, I still go on CSGO and get called a little boy. I'm 26 year-old female. I'm not a little boy, but that doesn't bother me. I'm kind of over that. I think that, you know, we're seeing a huge transition of women in different roles, and certainly that story is becoming more, prominent in different roles that would just be normal, typical sideline interviewers, but that's also they're very good at what they do because they're able to press answers out of people. So, you know, there's a vast amount of things to do. I just think constantly bear in mind, including everyone, not just females, and just use inclusive language on all your platforms and your broadcasts. Be inclusive of everyone that you're kind of using on camera, off camera, making sure that you're just bringing the best possible people in to do a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to emphasise on that as well. We get mainstream press coming to us saying, oh, there aren't many esports players that are female. Actually, they don't see what goes on backstage, and we've got a whole plethora of female talent, hosts, production staff, you know, streamers, content creators that are there, and it'd be good for them to get more recognition as well.
Just briefly on that, so on our Digital Schoolhouse thing, so important that kind of showcasing kind of diverse talent. Our Digital Schoolhouse programme in its first year had 7% female participation. Just by making exclusively the people we used in promotional material, the speakers we had, and everyone women, it went up to 20%. So right. Just little things can make a difference.
Brilliant. Okay, so next question. This is from Karishma. Do you think the UK was always heavily involved in esports viewership, or did the growth of Twitch and live streaming cause the change in the interest of esports?
I think the growth of Twitch and other live streaming platforms has caused growth across esports over the world. I don't think that's just a UK phenomenon. I think the UK, as Heather said earlier, has always kind of underestimated itself. We've had amazing organisations in the UK since kind of the very earliest days of esports, whether or not that was Four Kings or Dignitas or any of the other very many brilliant orgs and players, right? And people went to watch them play back in the day as well. It's way easier to do now, so more people do it globally.
I think we developed the hunger and need for commentary. I think in the UK, I think we can own that and claim that. Thanks Red Eye and D-Man and all those guys. You know, Henry G, Machine, all these huge talent. They all started from the ground up and really honed in on that craft of commentary, and they were putting on and figuring out how to do broadcasts themselves to share what they were doing, and so I think we owned that hunger for commentary for sure.
We've got 1 minute left, so I really want to get the next question in. I'll pass it to Clem, because it'd be good for you to end. So this is an anonymous one. What about the future of the esports economy? Will it ever break out of a sponsorship-driven economy to a self-sustaining economy? Because you know, a lot of people look at esports and think, oh, it's making loads of money. The publishers, the pro players are making that money. You know, can we make it more self-sustainable? And what's your thoughts there, Clem?
I think it's all about diversifying the revenue streams at the moment. There is an enormous audience that is used to getting absolutely everything for free. All of the content is streamed for free. Access to the games are often free to play. And all the revenue from those free-to-play games that we are advertising through independent esports tournaments is going towards advertising a game that is monetized outside of the esports ecosystem. some of the things that people have done with esports specific items, cosmetic items in game has helped. But I think there is still a hell of a lot more we can do in terms of things like merchandising, in terms of the way that we ticket events. We're 100% sure that nobody makes their money back from the ticket sales for esports events. So it's there is all those revenue streams that are not performing well enough, and that we've found across events of all shapes and sizes that you have sponsorships and media rights, and that's about it in terms of revenue streams. There is very few companies in esports at the moment that are turning an independent profit. A lot of companies backed by venture capital or investors. That means that at one point in the near future, we are going to have a moment where everybody starts to say, well, where can we get our money back from? And we as an industry as a whole need to figure that out. And not only to figure that out, but to convince the community and the fans that they might have to start paying for some of the stuff that they've previously got for free. And that's a very difficult kind of thing to bring across, because the viewership is still very volatile. Everybody is afraid to shut out certain sections. I don't know, Heather, if you have a different experience of that.
I know you wanted to end on Clement, but it's changing behaviour, and everyone loves a habit and they can't get out of that habit. And to start adding, an increase on a ticket price, trust me, that's hours and hours of discussions on whether we even increase it by £2. Are we shutting out? Are we going to have, backlash? We want it to be the best experience, but also we need to keep the lights on to be able to give that experience. So there's a fine line, and as I mentioned, touched upon business models and revenue streams is something that I think everyone's going to be assessing a lot more as we go forward, because you can't survive on sponsorship for sure.
Absolutely, some great answers there. Thanks very much to the panel for taking part. If we could have a round of applause, please.
Well done, guys.
I think that's it, so thank you very much for listening. I'll pass over to the host here. I think there's drinks now somewhere, but I don't have the full details, so I'll pass it over. Thank you.